Well, welcome everybody. This is really a very special treat for anyone who has followed theatre in India. The names Alkazi and Padamsee are just central to English theatre in India, to theatre writing in India, theatre productions, performances. And so it's such a treat to have with us Feisal Alkazi, who has written a wonderful book, which you should all go out and buy after the show, and I'm sure he'll be kind enough to sign it, on the family and on the beginnings of theatre, English theatre in India, and how it evolved, and about the legacy of that beginning. And we have from a virtual space in Bombay, we have up on your screens Quasar Thakore-Padamsee and Raell Padamsee, two wonderful stars, each in their own right and each in their fantastic ways in theatre in India. All of their bios are available on the website, so I'm not going to tell you who they are, although you all of you here already know who they are, so you don't need that introduction, really. You know, we had sort of an ambitious idea, and I don't know how that's going to evolve. Lekha is going to guide me in this process, and Raghu, to talk about the legacy of theatre in India, different theatre forms, the ways they've each evolved, the different spaces in which they have come into their own. I'm not quite sure how that's all going to work out. We need the help of everyone in theatre to make that happen. And of course, Lekha is much more informed than I am. And so we're going to try to make that happen. But this is really the first in that series, hopefully. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the wonderful Feisal Alkazi, playwright, writer, actor, holder of this legacy, and passer on of this legacy, in conversation with Suri from Rangashankara. We're indeed very pleased and honored that he's here with us too. So welcome, everyone.
Sometime around 1977 is when I joined NSD, and that was when Feisal was around NSD. I think his Richika had started. It was about 5-year-old or 6-year-old. He was hanging around, and he was a good friend of my classmates. We didn't talk, but I knew him because he's his son of the big man, Alkazi Saab. So that was that. And then after about 40 odd years or 30 odd years, then I met Feisal again when he sent me a mail saying that can he bring a Quiet Desire, his play, to our festival. And that's how we renewed our friendship or relations. We've been talking to each other, and whenever I want some good book, I talk to him, what he's read, what is he doing. So he's been a kind of inspiration to me also. Like we are contemporaries in that way, both born in 1955. That's it. Hi, Quasar and Raell. We try to explore Indian theatre through this
recording in progress.
It's for me? Okay. So, we try to explore Indian theatre through this book. As we keep talking, you get to know why we are doing it, or rather why I have planned to do that. To start with, I'll go ahead with this book, and then perhaps I'll involve Quasar, Raell, as we keep talking to...
Just contextualize who they are with me. Contextualize.
Yeah.
So these are my cousins, among many other things. It's a mafia that runs theatre in India.
Yeah.
We're all very closely connected.
You have let the secret out. I was supposed to ask you. Yeah,
sorry.
Anyway. I'll tell you why this book is important and what happens in this book. It's like in the scriptures we have a couple of samhitas, like the way you address it. Like we have a thing called Prabhu Samhita. It's like all the Vedas, they tell you what to do, and if you don't do it, you are punished and all those things. It dictates you to do this. The other one is Mitra Samhita, where it's all Puranas in India or Mitra Samhita. They talk to you as a friend with a lot of stories in between. They try to bring the point home by quoting a lot of stories in Puranas. The third one is Kanta Samhita. It's the literature, which is as if talking to a wife or wife talking to a husband. So there are three varieties of writing prose. I find this Mitra Samhita, because when you talk to Faisal, you should see him talking like, he whispers, he blinks and he underlines and he stresses the words. It's like, it's very animated, like he really talks like, And this book is exactly like that. It's talking to a friend. It's very flowing language, and you don't need dictionaries to understand, It's very simple. And second thing I like this is, if I quote from Penelope Caulfield in our book, it says that all people and peoples are living histories. For example, communities speak languages that are inherited from the past. They live in societies with complex cultures, traditions, and religions that have not been created on the spur of the moment. So understanding the linkages between past and present is absolutely basic for a good understanding of the conditions of being human. That's why history matters. It is not just useful, it is essential. I mean, for us, theatre also needs to be connected to the past. If I want to create something different, something new, I need to know what happened. I need to know the past. Theatre always draws from the past, like whether it's there, which is why even now Shakespeare's and Ibsen's and Carnats and Sarkars are relevant to us. Dr. Ananthamurthy used to tell me one day, unless one is aware of the past, nothing new can be created in the present. If you want to break something, you need to know what is there. If you want to question Ramayana or Mahabharata, you need to know what is that first, and then you can do anything you want to do. So Faisal's book does exactly that. Connects the past to the present, starts from somewhere and ends up in the present scenario of Indian theatre. I'll go back to the book now, Faisal. Talk to you as a friend. In one sentence, or two maybe, you write about how this book happened. I'm sorry, I'm asking the same question. You must have answered it. I'm sure there must have been an interesting story behind the book that happened.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
Sure. Well, we were at my wife and I, and my wife is right here, we were at a Diwali party of a very well-known children's book writer, Paro Anand, and a husband, and it's a very usual Delhi, very Punjabi party, open air and waiters with snacks, and Delhi, then it's got to be murg malai tikka and whiskey and vodka and everything else, and cards on every table. I'm not a card player. And Renuka, who commissioned this book finally, she just walked up to me. And in passing, she's walking past me and she says, "Oh, Faisal, you must write a family memoir," and she's gone. Exit stage left or whatever. So I just asked Radhika, I said, "What did she say?" She said, "You have to write a family memoir, so you better do it. It's a great idea." I wasn't sure whether it was a great idea at all. So I waited a bit. I've known Renuka for 30 years as a publisher with many different agencies and done fabulous work with all of them, including that absolutely wretched publication that comes out called Delhi Times, and its clones all over India, initiated by my good friend Renuka. And you know how popular that is. They found that everybody reads that before they read the regular paper. So I thought for 6 weeks, and I went back to her and I said, "Okay, what's the plan?" She said, "Write it." I said, no, let's speak a bit further. She said, no, what is there to talk about? You just start writing the book. And believe you me, in the next 6 weeks, 2019, by mid-February, I had written the first 10 chapters effortlessly, as though it was just flowing out of me completely. And I took it back to her. She said, okay, let's meet for lunch. IIC, which is very similar to this in Delhi, in the International Center. We met for lunch. I said, what do you think? She said, wonderful, done. I said, what do you mean, wonderful, done? What are you going to do? What am I supposed to do? She said, no, just go ahead. What about, should we have chicken cutlets? So that was the extent to which my editor worked with me, quite frankly, from beginning to end. So she felt it was very easy to read. She felt it captured my conversational style. And she said, it's so engaging. So just do it. And then when you know a book is coming out, I've done many, but this is my first one, which has gone into a big time publisher. It's interesting how it just becomes, I can't say popular, but it becomes known. Maybe that's the word to use. And I was overwhelmed by the reviews by very prominent literary critics and people who'd seen it. But many people in the art scene wrote about it. And I said, oh my God, perhaps it was a book that needed to be written more than anything else. So we're just not even a year into it. It came out at the end of January this year. And the paperback is around the corner. And the Hindi edition, the top Hindi publishers, Raj Kamal, they approached me and said, we want to do it in Hindi straight off. I said, okay, speak to my publisher and go ahead and do that. So it happened in that way. I don't know if there was some huge effort or there was really no effort at all in doing it. It was effortless for me. And there's a lot that Quasar has reminded me in one of the events, and Raell have invited, that you've left out this and not written about that. And perhaps everything goes through a sieve in one's head, you know what I mean? And things fall through, and other things you kind of say, okay, we don't have to go into that one, not immediately. So it was fun. It was very easy. And I'm only born in chapter 11. So it's an interesting book that 10 chapters before that are all before me.
Well, now the other thing is like, why enter stage right? Why not stage left? Why not just enter stage? Why enter stage right?
Oh my God, the title was the most difficult thing to do because it's got to be something that people will get straight off, It's not perhaps an area of writing that's not been much explored in India or anywhere in the world is about theatre. We have much more on art, we have much more on music, dance, but theatre is not written much about. So you go searching for the few books that exist. So theatre or stage or something or the other had to be there, Suri, in some way or the other. So just as a fun thing, because it's one of the usual things that is there, no? When you read a script, his character enters stage right or exits stage left in the more traditional plays. So I just said, okay, this is an okay title. I wasn't thrilled. I'm still not thrilled by it. I don't know if it's a definitive title. I don't think it's far wrong. Why it's not enter stage left, I don't know. But I'm happy with this.
Okay. What have been your preparations for this book? Like I'm telling you, I'm asking this because this book is not just a memoir. Not just about Padamsees and Alkazis. It's about theatre. And it's about Indian modern theatre. About Bombay, Delhi theatre. And not just theatre. But theatre history with its cultural and political contexts. Now, you don't just write what happened in Kolkata, or why Salome happened in such and such a fashion, or what happened to Antigone when your father directed it. You bring in a political context or the cultural context. When Alkazis moved into Delhi, you don't just see that he moved into Delhi, but you bring in the political scenario or the cultural scenario of Delhi when Alkazis moved into that. Which means you must have had a lot of talking and a lot of research. Like, what has been the preparation behind this book? Because it's not an easy book to write.
Actually, nothing. I'll be very frank. Perhaps two sources that I used. I'd written the first 10 chapters and I said, let me go back to Bombay and to my grandmother's house where Raell now stays, Kulsum Terrace, and that's such a big character in my book. Such a big character in, I think, theatre history of India. And I had a chat with Raell at length about her parents, Alec and Padamsee. And I also spent time with my other cousin, Aisha Sayani. And she'd done a lovely thing about 25 years ago. She caught hold of my mother and Alec. My mother and Alec are brother and sister. She also got a couple of the earlier people from the theatre group in Bombay and done long video interviews with them. So I said, Pooh, I'm looking for some stuff. I have to fill in some details. I've written already this part. She said, here. She gave me about 50 pages where somebody had actually transcribed from all the video tapes of Jacinda Kuna and Kaushal Ezekiel and my mother and Alec. And that, of course, was very rich. But I didn't rewrite. I just used those verbatim. I just sprinkled them in the first few chapters of the book. So perhaps that was one preparation. The other part was we had also done the huge exhibition my sister had put together on my father, which came up about 5 years ago. So everything was documented photographically. So when Renuka asked for pictures, she said about 30. I said, oh, I can give you 200. She said, what? You have 200 pictures and all of them have date, time, place, detail, who's in it, who's in this play, who's done what. So that was ready-made material. So from 30 pictures, she went to 60 pictures in 2 sections. And that's a rich part of the book, which unfortunately, as usual, is not on the Kindle edition. Those lovely pictures. And then so many of my very close friends, Pablo Bartholomew and Ram Rahman, who are like big photographers now, we grew up together. So they had extensive pictures and stunning ones, which also appear in the book. So that was perhaps a huge value added, in my view. And actually, Suri, I see everything in theatre as being hugely political. So whenever I do a play with my group Ruchika, and I think my father perhaps did it in his own way without stating it, I state it, so I'm known as this person who's going to run into some problem with any government that's in power. I always contextualize. So the context for me is very, very crucial. And I think to understand Indian theatre, and particularly what happened in English language, and then influenced Hindi language theatre, national theatre so completely, which is what happened in my mother's family, Padamsees, and then my father, Ebrahim Alkazi. One had to understand what was happening in the 40s in Bombay. Why was it in 1943 that actually not only the theatre group came into being, but IPTA came into being, and Prithviraj Kapoor's troupe, the Prithvi Theatres, not the physical building, but the travelling troupe, which some of you all know went around India, actually doing a lot of plays on communal harmony, with Zora Sehgal acting in, Zora and Uzra both acting in them. So that's really a crucible moment in Indian history. What's happening in cinema at that time with Guru Dutt and the rest, what's happening in painting with Hussain, the progressive, Souza, what's happening with progressive writers, what's happening with Ismat Chugtai. It's all in a very, very tight period of time. And I said, why this time? What's actually happening in Bombay in the early 40s? So most of us don't know. This took some research. But actually in the 30s and 40s, everything beyond the Oval Maidan, for those of you all who know Bombay, was being reclaimed from the sea. So what we know now as Churchgate, Nariman Point, Marine Drive, Chowpatty didn't exist. They were reclaimed from the sea. And as you know, that beautiful Art Deco frontage that lines the whole of Marine Drive, all the same height, all with similar architectural features, was a strong design element because there was so much money in Bombay. And all the cinema halls of that period, Metro, New Empire, Eros Cinema, all standing examples of fabulous Art Deco architecture. So all within 10 years, this all gets built in Bombay. As the film industry is coming into its own with the kind of cinematography of Guru Dutt or the lyrics of Sahil Ludhianvi and many other people. So Bombay had become this big rallying point because of the money, and also because during World War II, there were so many people, so many, on the one side, soldiers from all over the world congregating in the ports. And then it became a big haven for many Jews escaping Europe and Hitler. So the art scene could never have happened without those three major people, Langhammer and Rudy Leiden, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the third one's name. But they were so crucial for providing the first studios, the spaces, the funding, to the Souzas, to the Razas, to the Bakre, Ara, that whole first lot of painters. So, and all these people were friends. And I think the big discovery that I made was, it was the first time even a very elitist family, which the three of us belonged to, Quasar, Raell and me, moneyed, rich, wealthy. My grandmother owned 8 buildings in Bombay, each named after one of her children, and each one with 4 or 5 stories high. So that kind of money, and meeting people who were literally off the street. Hussain was literally a roadside painter, you know what I mean? So the starting point, Souza's mother was a tailor. So the starting point and these people coming together through the arts, actually meeting through the arts, is a very westernized family of the Padamsees. And my father coming from quite a different background, from Pune, from a Jesuit institution, from a household where actually a very young Maulvi lived with them, and all conversation at home was in Arabic, and you did all the 5 prayers and all of that. So I think just that moment in history has been very exciting for people, and I've researched more for the next book, which I'm 3/4 of the way through, on Souza. Because Souza was a close family friend, and I've been fascinated by his art. I've written something in search of Souza, but just to contextualize the artist in his environment, in his time. And the dilemmas change as art changes and must change in response to situations around us. So I think the fun of the book for many people lies in that. And then my father and Souza and Nissim, Ezekiel, all together going to England at the same time with the 2 who were married, their wives, my mother and Maria Souza, in reaching England, which was bombed out, Blitz. And then the big effort by the British government to bring the arts into being by that huge Festival of Britain in 1951 or 52, where what we all know as the South Bank now came into being, because everything had been bombed there. So we go to the Tate, we go to BFI, we go to the National Theatre, we go to the Opera House there, the whatever it's called, and the Museum of Photography, and that all came into being at that time, and they were there. They were there when it was happening, and art was being questioned after World War II, and all the new ideas at that time were Sartre, were Camus, were existentialism. And then moving to Delhi in the early 60s, which still had that whole Nehruvian kind of, what should one say, a mystique. Maybe mystique is a good word. So I think a lot of the people who moved to Delhi, artists, writers, thinkers, so many of them, so much of it, not my father maybe so much, but the Delhi art scene was very much Addabazi at Coffee House in Connaught Place, which is a big, scrappy kind of looking tent where everyone gathered and chatted and talked about. So Mohan Rakesh's latest story, and the other lady we've just lost the other day, the Hindi writer, Manu Bhandari. So, and the artists. So my childhood was in and out of Ram Kumar's house and Christian Khanna's house, and meeting so much of, another friend of mine is here, Tani Bhargav. Her mother was the big publisher of Raj Kamal at that time. So these were all friends. Now they're all names, but they were all just very intimate friends. So Hussain could walk into our house at 7:15 in the morning, normal time for breakfast, ring the bell and say, I saw your play last night to my father, and here's a sketchbook full of drawings inspired by the play. People can't believe you had a life like that. You lived a childhood. I said, yes, it was like that. And for my cousins also, it's the same story. So theatre's in the house. You don't go somewhere else. The drawing room is disrupted. Both my cousins still do it. Their poor parents or, whoever, wherever they are, all furniture is moved and rehearsals are there.
2 of my questions have gone.
Good. He's got a potha, he's shaved. He's shamelessly waving it at me. There are like 50 pages of questions. Okay.
Two of them have gone now. Anyway.
They may have perspectives, these two on the screen in front of us. Ask them what they think of what happened
That's
then.
right. Let's come to the thing. What made you start with the book with Kulsumbai's Terrace and that horseshoe-shaped table?
Well, I think it's a fabulous image. She's sitting at it just now, Raell, I'm sure. She's sitting at that horseshoe-shaped table, not eating anything, but certainly at the table. My grandmother was a fantastic, very controlling matriarch, maybe from Bangalore. No, she wasn't. She was actually from Bombay, who'd come up, built herself up, and decided kids had to have Western education. She didn't speak any English when she moved to Bombay. And then she had a lot of children. She had as many children actually as Mumtaz Mahal, 14. And like Mumtaz Mahal, many of them died along the way. So she's left with 8 of them. So can you imagine a pregnancy every 18 months? So she saw some Hollywood movie and she saw this table and she said, oh, I have to make this in my Shiraz Furniture Works. And she had this big horseshoe-shaped table with some mistaken notion that some servant would stand in the center and serve everybody. You know, there was no servant. He never came and served us at all. But it's remained and it's iconic. Both of them, Quasar and Raell, still have, occasionally had rehearsals around it. Raell's house full of scripts piled up. Till today, theatre group meetings were often there. Quasar told me when they were starting THESPO, which is a big university movement in theatre, there they were, the demigods of Bombay theatre, Jacinta Kuna and everybody else sitting back at that table. So it's very central as an image in all our lives. I grew up around it and it's still there. They've gone, that generation. There are few of them left, but the table endures. As furniture endures, isn't it strange? They made everything about that dreadful Burma teak. At least these new wood and those plywood particles, everything disintegrates in 4 or 5 years. But Burma teak goes on forever.
Also, you wrote a small little note to me when I asked this question earlier. You said that's because everybody knows about Alkazi Sahib. When I say Alkazi Sahib, it's Ebrahim Alkazi because he was our director. It's about, everybody knows about Alkazi Sahib's life after NSD.
Yeah.
But most of them don't know what happened before.
Yeah.
Was that the reason why you start from there and then you bring
I think you have to decide what's the starting point in any memoir, isn't it? What you feel is really that Hindi wala beej.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the seed is there and then out of that the ankur or the little sapling comes out and grows up into a vast big tree. So I thought that was the moment. I think to be thrown out of college for the kind of theatre you're doing, it still happens so much these days, for trying to do Oscar Wilde's Salome, which is quite a salacious play even today. I don't think we'd be able to stage it over here or many parts of the world. And then just people were 16, 17 meeting for the first time. My uncle Hamid Sayani, the famous voice, Amin's brother from Binaka Geetmala, or my other uncle Derek Jeffries, or so many people who went into so many diverse professions, young people. And that was the moment that they met. That was a moment where perhaps minds were ignited and lots of ideas were being churned all the time. And the scripts also that they were doing, originally just back to good old Shakespeare and Oscar Wilde, but very soon looking at what was being written in Europe. So first productions, I think, in Asia of Waiting for Godot, soon after it was written in France by Beckett, happened in Bombay. Or Tennessee Williams, Suddenly Last Summer, happened in Bombay, So that moment, you had to decide where to start and where to end it. End became easier because my father passed while we were still writing the book. But I thought that was the moment where people got together. And any theatre movement starts like that, isn't it? It is that moment when people who have a passion for the theatre really unite and then discuss and debate and get ready and then say it's rubbish and let's start again and all of that. So for me, that horseshoe-shaped table and these 17-year-olds sitting around it deciding to form the theatre group was the moment.
And also that's the beginning of Indian modern theatre.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
It is the beginning. It is a very important turning point. And so many people, including your very own Girish Karnad, wrote so eloquently through his life about being able to see a play up on our terrace where My father had built a theatre, and actually seeing lighting being used. You know, he'd grown up with the Petromax lamps in the kind of theatre he was seeing in Dharwad. And then he came to Bombay. And then he said, oh my God, you know, you can fade out and you can fade in, and music can come on cue, and music can underline a scene and it can be snapped out in a second like that. So a lot of contemporary theatre techniques of that time were quite revolutionary, which when they happened in English language theatre in Bombay, with Alec and Pearl and my father and many other directors. And that by osmosis, because they were all together, went into Marathi and went into Gujarati, because Vijaya always says, I am Alkazi's first student, Vijaya Mehta. So she took so much of it into the wonderful work she did in Marathi theatre. And Dubey was a protege of my father's. And so many writers just grew up around that. Tendulkar used to come regularly up to Achat and write in Marathi, saying, go and see the Alkazi's latest, this Yerma on his rooftop. So it's interesting that's the answer to...
Girish also says that the Anvi's Antigone
Yes.
Crystallized his
Writing skill.
writing.
Yeah.
And then he knew what to write and how to write.
Yeah. He was looking for a break. Girish was looking, I don't think one ever consciously does it. He was on his way to England, as all of you all know. And I think 2-3 things that he saw: my father's production of Miss Julie, Strindberg's Miss Julie, with my father acting with Alakananda Samarth, who's still acting. And then he just saw the dynamics, because when you read Strindberg, you don't understand the sexuality, and when you see it on stage, it pops off the stage. And of course, Anouilh was a big new writer, Jean Anouilh, and his reinterpretation of Greek myth in Eurydice, and of course Antigone, that all of us know. I'm sure you've had numerous productions of Anouilh's Antigone at Ranga Shankara. And he thought, okay, this is a new way to reinterpret myth for today. And perhaps he said in one of his articles that I just went home and I wrote Yayati in 3 nights. I wrote the whole script, and suddenly I was writing in Kannada, and I said, oh my God, why am I writing in Kannada? And then he got onto the ship to go to England to do his further studies, and a major actress with my dad, Farida Sonawala, she was his great friend on the ship. And those conversations started about theatre and what should happen, and the rest is history.
Not many of us, not many in theatre know about Sultan Bobby Padamsee. You say that Bobby committed suicide. Alkazi Sahab and Ali Padamsee owe a lot to Bobby Padamsee, am I right? Okay. You dedicate a whole chapter to his death in the book. Tell us about Bobby, because most of us don't know. Real
Okay.
Sultan.
So,
And how much his death affected the future course of Indian theatre.
okay. I think we can all do this in turn, including those
That's
two guys.
what I'll bring in them now.
Okay,
So you start.
great. Well, I think a very charismatic young man who got into Oxford at age 14 and had to sit out a year because they didn't take people younger than 15. And beginnings of World War II, so his mother was very worried he'd be stuck in England at Oxford, and bombs were going off already in London, and the seas were full of torpedoes. So they were very worried how they'd make their way back. This is before flights. It was all done by ship, 3 weeks in a ship. So comes back to India, very bright, very talented, very artistic, very openly gay in his behavior as well. And he came from a conventional Khoja family, where 2 of my grandmother's brothers had also been gay, Bada Mamu and Chota Mamu, and it was like a dim, dark secret not to be revealed. And then met this bunch of people with very diverse backgrounds and started this movement and headed it for just 3 years before he committed suicide at a very young age. And his suicide, of course, as all suicides do, galvanized all the people who surrounded him in the main and on the periphery. And within a year of Bobby's suicide at Kulsum Terrace, on the 9th of January, 1946, all these people married into the family. So my parents got married in the same year, Ebrahim and Roshan, Hamid and Zarina Sayani, and Derek and Shiraz Jeffries. So within a year, from just one person leading the group, there was suddenly these 6 people who had that kind of role to play, and it was thrust onto them. And my father became kind of the easy heir to Bobby's legacy, because Alec, who was the next brother, was 10 years younger. The difference between my father's age and Alec. So Alec was 10, my father was 20. And they decided, as we all do, as a debt to the person who's just passed, don't we? We have to do things in their memory and keep it going. So that was a lot of the spur for the theatre movement, the theatre group, yeah. And maybe...
And also, Bobby was directing Shakespeare, and then Salome he directed, and that's how the Indian modern theatre started, kind of,
Absolutely.
started getting.
Yeah.
So I'll take this question to Quasar and Raell. How do you relate to this legacy of Bobby Sultan Padamsee? Like, how do you relate to this? It's a big name, in theatre.
Hi, everyone. So actually, I relate to him very, very, very closely because, a huge portrait of him, a 6-foot portrait of him hangs over my dining table. And so I get to engage with him quite often, in that sense. But obviously, one has heard so many stories and so many lovely, lovely anecdotes about Bobby, that is Sultan. We also my mother had started a playwriting competition in his name.
Sultan
and that's the Thakore-Padamsee award for playwriting. And many, many years later, after it, fell by the wayside, I picked it up again and reignited it in a way. And then, of course, Aisha Sayani's taken it over now, and she's done fantastic work with it. But coming back to Bobby, I think, yes, that was the beginning and that was the start of it all. I think they were all very, very influenced by, Lee Strasberg. And Faisal, I don't know, I think you've mentioned it in your book, I'm not sure. But the reason also they called this the theatre group of Bombay was because of the group theatre that existed in New York, which Lee was so much a part of and, initiated. So, yeah, I think for all of us in the family, he's been very, very significant. And as have all the other members, including Elk and, of course, my parents and the whole extended family. And I just want to say one more thing about the horseshoe table, which I think is terribly important, is that my grandmother, I think without my grandmother, there wouldn't have been any theatre, because she gave everybody the comfort of opening her huge home out to rehearsals. We have terraces all over. So on every terrace, there was a different rehearsal going on. Roshan was making costumes. Derek was doing the lighting somewhere else. Of course, Alkazi was directing. It was all one big, fantastical, space for theatre. And she fed everybody from start to finish. Food was something that was a very big thing with her. So apart from sitting around the table, the horseshoe table, and actually doing the rehearsals and the readings, etc., they all sat down and ate together. And that was a very, very big bonding factor, I feel. To come to a home where you're going to be fed every single day after your rehearsal. You don't have to go home. You don't have to, travel and get home after your rehearsals and things like that. It's all laid out for you. And my grandmother loved all that. So I think that was something very key. Sorry, Q, yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right in that. I think, to start with, until I read Faisal's book and actually the Alkazi exhibition that happened before that, I didn't know very much about Bobby. This was kind of a name that was passed down over time. It's this legendary kind of figure. So I'm thinking of someone 8 feet tall, in my mind's eye, this massive presence, this incredible thing. And And my father told a lovely story about how when he went, in fact, I think the first time he met Pearl, he went to St. Xavier's College. And I think Pearl was the secretary of the drama society at the time. And my father and AP went and said, I'd like to join. And she said, okay, and what's your name? And he said, Alec Padamsee. And she went, what? Are you related to Bobby Padamsee? And it was a big deal on the college circuit, at the time in the, in the 1950s or whatever, or 40s and 50s. So he clearly had this huge shadow. It's only when I actually read Faisal's book, I realized he wasn't a very tall man. He was actually quite tiny, but his personality clearly shone through. And I think that was an inspiration, and he became kind of like a totem pole that everyone kind of gravitated towards. And he became a force, and I think what he did was he introduced people to new things. And this is what I find fascinating about Derek and Alkazi himself and my father and whatever, was their thirst for new things. And when we talk about how theater evolved, they were not content with what they saw or what they were doing. They were constantly trying to innovate and break barriers. And I think that's what Bobby, at least in hindsight, what I think is that what Bobby did is introduce new things, and then this pursuit of newness, this pursuit of the interesting, I think is what he imparted on all these guys, and they just charged forward with it. But just to echo Raell's point, in a city like Bombay, where space is such a premium and so difficult to get, and I think that's a very good reason why Faisal has started his story with Kulsumbai, is because she provided that space where people could come together. And if Bobby was interested in something else like accountancy, she would have still found a place to bring the accountants together. But because it was the theater, and she was so passionately kind of in support of what her children wanted to do, it became the theater, and thank God for it. And as a result, I think that also is a kernel that has traveled, because you can see that in once Alkazi and Roshan moved into their house, it became an incredibly open kind of melting pot, open doors, people could come in, and the theater upstairs. That was then reflected in the Bullabhai Desai Institute that happened, at Kemp's Corner. And it is something that has kept happening and continues to happen, which is you provide space and you feed everyone that turns up. I mean, Raell does this constantly at rehearsal. Sometimes you have to tell her to stop. We're trying to work. Stop with the food. And Pearl had this as well, So I think that's a huge part of if you want the wonderful thing about let's say an amateur social theater is the fact that you want to be with these other people, and that positivity automatically creates a great energy into creating more exciting ideas, because not everything is formalized. And I think that's where new ideas for plays come, new ideas for things happen, and that's wonderful.
Also, I'll just throw a couple of things into the mix here. Thanks so much, Raell and Quasar. Lovely points out of me. They started having parties every Saturday evening. We roll up the carpet, and it's a huge drawing room, still there, with Raell holding court normally. And so it was the latest Western music, and music was all changing, as you know, in the late 40s and 50s. Also for these 4 Khoja sisters, not very conventional at all. My mother and 3 of her sisters, and the brothers were much younger. They could meet and dance with men from all over Bombay. You know what I mean? So my uncle Derek very humorously referred to it as the hunt, because the men were there hunting for these women, and I've written quite a funny chapter when they were banned from the household. So they'd stand 4 stories down on the road at the PST bus stop and look up for these 3 Juliets to appear. So I think for all theater people, including my generation, and I know people who've just been with me performing at Rang Shankara yesterday, the mixing pot of theater and people who are coming from such diverse backgrounds and united by just one passion is very important. And also the other part, beyond the westernized, I think the other part of my grandmother's personality, which I find fascinating, is Kefi used to come, and do Kefi Azmi, Shabana's dad, the very famous poet, used to come and do his, sessions with poetry there. So it wasn't only English language theatre. And the other thing that maybe you also don't know, Suri, is when MS Satyu was running out of money to do Garam Hawa, the last lot of shooting, he went straight to my grandmother because she was loaded and asked her. She said, of course, Satyu, take the money, only 25% interest per month. That's all. And Satyu finished Garam Hawa, actually the editing stage, with a lot of money from Thakore-Padamsee. So it wasn't just theatre. It was already the other arts, whether it was cinema or poetry, and to provide that space within your house, which all of us continue to do, is so essential. Just to have that space to sit with people your own age and engage in ideas or talk about politics, or say, I'm going from here to Gandhiji's, this particular thing that's happening at your party. Or it's all those years, you know what I mean? You're opening your window and the students have all left school and college. There are those bonfires of foreign cloth. We can't even visualize it today. Okay, or you one actress from the Marathi stage who became the biggest. 1943 was 100 years of Marathi theatre. So she writes beautifully that Wilson College, and some of you all know it, it's right on Chowpatty. You could stand on Wilson College, look out, and there were these women streaming towards the sea to make salt. So it's a moment in the history of a nation, and the arts can only echo and reflect that.
Yesterday, I was talking to Satyu, and I told him this 25% business, and he said yes. And then he saw the pictures. I got the book for him, and they saw the picture, and they saw this chitneys and kusum in Antigone. He said, I did the light for this. Oh, that's nice. So such a thing. Now, tell me, what the horseshoe table shaped table became the theatre center purely because of Bobby, or it's your grandmother? It would have happened even otherwise.
Well, she was the doting mother, and she had a son who was like the ultimate, to have a child who's very talented academically, and he wore what I wear now. He wore churidars and colored kurtas. This is 1943. Everybody wore pearl. When she met Alec, was in khadi. You're thinking of pearl and khadi salwar kameez, meeting Alec for the first time when they were 16 or 17. And he wore jutis. He had 50 pairs of jutis. He wore a cloak. He would take his mother's pendants and wear them around his neck. He'd take her chokers and he'd wear them, and he'd just wander around like that. So I think that doting mother and the son with really everything a mother would wish for, except perhaps his sexuality. Maybe she had problems with that. I think it's amazing that perhaps because he was that golden boy, that so many opportunities were provided, and she provided them to the daughters. So my mother was doing this dance at the Seven Veils when she was 17. Because the lead actress in Salome said, this I can't do. The Parsis will throw me out of the community. I won't be allowed into the fire temple the next day. So I'll do all the Oscar Wilde lines, but there's a dance at the end, very lascivious, biblical striptease, as I've called it. And then, she asked for the head of John the Baptist on a platter to be brought to her. So my mother said, I'll do it. I'm 17. I love dancing, and I'll strip not everything, but a lot of what I'm wearing on stage. But then for a mother to allow that, knowing this is Khoja, knowing that these girls are of a marriageable age, knowing that they've learned how to cook, sew, embroider, make jelly, and whatever else we have, custard and various kinds of Western desserts, because they had spent 2-3 years, all of them in England, in school, just before World War II. So it was a very united family. I must say my grandfather had very little role to play. He lived on the other side of the house, but he was a very benign presence, a big-time Bombay businessman who was going around and dropping workers home during curfew times. He would go in the car, put all the workers from the big glass works that they ran, and drop them home. through curfew-bound Muhammad Ali Road, Bori Bandar, those parts of Bombay. So I think enlightened in a very different kind of way. And certainly, I certainly think without my grandmother, my Nani Ma and their Dadi Ma, theatre wouldn't have happened. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think they are very influential and almost unsung heroes of the theater. Generally, I mean, the directors get all the credit, or the actors get all the credit, but there are these people, and for to have a thriving theater community and a thriving theater ecosystem, I think it's the people like this who provide the space, who provide the confidence for the rest of the doers to do. And I think Kulsumbai played a huge part in that. And I think that was quite an important thing. And yes, it was blind faith because her son was so special, and she doted on him. But I think that becomes a really important aspect that we sometimes forget. I mean, theater mothers are a big part of all our lives. In a weird way, they have allowed us to venture into literally the unknown, and supported us when others wouldn't. So yeah, I think Kulsumbai, I mean, hats off, man. At the time, incredible.
Yeah. So no, what I wanted to say was about Kulsumbai, that it wasn't only Bobby. It was Alec, it was Bubbles, it was everybody that came after. I mean, up until the time when Daddy did the birthday party, which was in the 70s, where again, they performed right here at Kulsum Terrace in the drawing room. She would have the Jesus Christ Superstar rehearsals were held at Kulsum Terrace on all the terraces, and that was like a cast of almost 100 people. And imagine literally, I mean, having 100 people in your home, and this loud rock music for this poor Gujarati lady anyhow. But, she loved it. She loved it. She called them all Jifras and, dismissed them all, but fed them all nonetheless. And, also the nurturing, I think that's very key. And I think that, Faisal, I'm so happy that you started off and kicked off with Dadima, because when you think about it, really, I mean, even what you said, without her and her support and monetary support as well. And Baradada, I think, used to monitor, Candy was saying that he also used to, fund the rehearsals, etc. So I think, they deserve their name in lights, so to speak.
Yeah. And if you just think of all the mothers, my mother, complete nurturing of my theatre group in Delhi, Ruchika, and my actors would just wait for her comments after the show, because she would be there on opening night, and they knew that she would have only 100 things to say after the show. We can improve that. We can do that in her very nice, vague fashion. She was never very tough as spokesperson. Or, of course, Raell's formidable mother, Padamsee, whose house was just built as a theatre. When they were staying on Hood House Road, it was really like a theatre, because the accordion doors leading out to the terrace opened up, and we would sit on the terrace and the play would happen in the drawing room. Or even the huge support Quasar's had from his mother, from Dodi Thakur, completely backing up whatever he wanted to do. So we are very lucky to have mothers like that too. And the houses just became public space, thoroughfare, and many love affairs of many kinds nurtured on those spaces. Yes, am I right, Raell? Many of them.
Absolutely. They call the theatre marriages. Farokh and Vijaya to kick off with, Usha and Kersi Katra. So many. My parents.
My parents.
Your parents. Okay, we can name all of them now. Right.
Tell us about these two families coming together and to become Padamsees and Alkazis, to become the first family of Indian theatre, Indian modern theatre. Because I remember, I've been in touch with a couple of family companies which are very big. One is my wife is the granddaughter of Gubi Viranga, so that's a huge theatre family. We have another theatre family in Bangalore. It is Prabhat Shishu Vihara. It's another massive like it's branches all around. And there's one wonderful theater that's happening in Hyderabad is Surabhi. The entire family, they're all related and they do it. But they are about 100, 120-year-old companies. But this is the Indian modern theater where really the Indian theater started. How did this happen? Like the two families coming together? Because culturally, socially, they are different.
Very different. But as I said before, I think that was what was happening in Bombay at the time. And perhaps the last phase of the national movement was about that. Was finally people mixing and talking and at the same level. So it didn't matter whether Hussain was living on the road or Ara he was a car cleaner's son. Actually, Ara's father was a car cleaner, and Ara spent a lot of his time as a car cleaner. So I think that democratization happened a lot in Bombay. And I think that's very key to understand why the kind of theater that happened. And also it was the time of all the progressive writers, not only the artists, but the writers as well. And we all know what those stories mean to us 70, 80 years later, how any collection is always Ismat or Manto till today, a new translation, a new version, a new reinterpretation in that way. But I think democratization is very crucial. And I think somewhere because this family attracted people by virtue of coming on stage through college drama, as Thespo does now, to provide that platform for the first time for a young person who may grow up, and I'm using the right name, grow up to become Huma Qureshi. Am I right? That the right name to use? Yes? Okay, I've got something right. Or anybody else. So I think that becomes very, very interesting when people of different faiths, backgrounds, regions of India, languages come together. My father was learning Kathakali in 1943 for Bobby's production of, he was going to do Tagore's, one of them, I think Chitra. So my father was set, go and learn Kathakali. So there he was going to some guru and starting with all his eye stuff and the massage and stuff. Yeah. So maybe that's one thing that grew, and it was not only my father, it wasn't only Alkazi, it was Sayani, which came from very different background. It was Jeffries, which is completely an Anglo-Indian kind of family. And all the people who came in, there was Jean Bhavanagri, who was French and Parsi. There were Adi Marzban, the big demigod of the commercial Gujarati stage, but all working together. And perhaps that friction or fusion between them created this moment.
Quasar and Raell, like how Alkazi Saab was inducted into theatre, the Padamsees. Any idea? I'll come to him later. Because I know that Alkazi Saab was there, but he was not into theatre, but it is Padamsees who brought him to theatre.
Well, I think here's where Bobby plays a huge part. Particularly when you're young and you're in college or whatever, if you have someone who is charismatic, and from legend has it, Bobby was incredibly charismatic. And the fact, I think, that he was in a weird way non-conformist made him stand out that much and make him that much more attractive. And then when you combine that with a certain eruditeness or whatever, I think that we get attracted to people like that. I mean, there is a general charisma that they have. And I think that was really the first introduction of Alkazi Saab to another world. And sometimes what happens is, I mean, you sometimes have a perfect storm. You have someone who kind of becomes a symbol, and you have 5 or 6 people that completely get attracted to that, and then they all have the same idea and they run with it. I mean, there's a lovely business case study which says the founder is not the most important person. The first follower is of any movement. And I think Alkazi Saab was the first follower. And because he was so excited by what he saw and what happened, I think that he then ran with it. And I mean, Bobby's legacy is alive today by all the work that Alkazi Saab has done, and through what happened at National School of Drama, and even after, and in the painting world, which honestly, till the exhibition happened, I didn't realize Bobby was so into painting and poetry in the way that he was. But it was that spark, and I think that's a huge part of the story from whatever I have been able to glean. Again, this is all history, and for me as a young theater, or not a young theater maker, but for me as a theater maker, a book like this is very, very interesting and exciting, because it chronicles, even if I'm not connected to it, it chronicles this world which I had no access to, and I didn't have access to till I saw the exhibition, or till I saw that. And for me, this is my legacy as a theater maker, not as someone from the family at all. As a theater person working in India today, it is important to know what our past is. Otherwise, we tend to reinvent the wheel every time, and you don't hand that over, So I think books like this are really, really important in that way.
Okay, I have so many questions, but I don't think we have time.
Come back tomorrow.
Oh yeah, that's good. So Quasar and Raell, we meet tomorrow elsewhere, but
Give samosas also or something.
yeah. Thanks a lot, Quasar and Raell. And I would say that, I mean, when 4 theater people come together and start talking, there is no end to that. We keep on talking theater, and all of us are here. So, but sorry to take it only towards theater, because this book is about that. And then if you buy this book and read it, then you'll know what, it's not just the theater. That's what I can assure you. It's not just theater. It's a lot of human thing is in this, like, what happens behind theater. I think you people should buy it and read it. It's wonderful. So, Quasar, thank you. And sometime in Bangalore we meet, maybe this is coming here. And Raell, nice meeting you. I haven't met you before.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having us.
1 second, don't go away.
Questions for you.
Okay. We want to open it to this I didn't know. We want to open it to the audience, like if there are any questions from them.
For you as well. Yeah.
2 of you.
So I don't know, while the audience is thinking, since I have the mic, I'm going to ask a question or actually make a comment. One word which really stayed with me was crucible, and I think that's something that really embodies this legacy, and the reason that this legacy has sustained, and also the idea, Raell, of feeding everyone, because I think to theatre groups here in the South, the Madras players and Abhinaya with Sneha and Patabi and which Kirtana is now carrying forward. And I think food and the holding of warmth and nurturing, to use your word, is something that's very critical to keeping it alive. But the extended family, in a way, is what is carrying this legacy forward, each in their different directions. What if it's a nuclear family?
Well, I think we're all nuclear in our own way. I don't think we really interact in that kind of way. That we are tenuously linked together by grandparents is a great feeling. Yeah. But I think also from each one of us as artists and as creators, perhaps, of theatre more than artists, I think all the people one touches in different ways. What I'm passing on to somebody, has it come from a rehearsal of Pearls of Godspell or Alex of Birthday Party or my father's of Tughlaq? I don't know where it's coming from. You know what I mean? So it just very simply, it goes generationally. Yes. Like last night after my shows in Bangalore, and my actors were on stage after 20 months. And for actors, it's like you're in a sort of bleak desert. So they're also emotional and weepy and everything. And that whole idea that even what they've imbibed from working with me and my group, it's not me and my group. It's my mother, it's my father, it's Bobby. Yes. And it goes back in that way. So we may not spell it out each time that this came from. Okay.
Yes.
But I see, I was there for the dress rehearsal of the birthday party, Pinter's play in my grandmother's drawing room. And it was just audience like backed up in single chairs around the wall. And what was that? Here was I, Alkazi's son. There was Alec, who was Bobby's brother. Dolly was soon to be Quasar's mother. My grandmother was in the next room. The lighting was by my other uncle, Derek Jeffries. And the actors on stage were like something else. I mean, it was a huge moment for me, sitting just in that dress rehearsal. So I think in various little ways, theatre seeps through generations and ideas percolate.
Yes.
And I think that openness of mind perhaps is very important to have. And you don't always know, you're opening your mouth, but what's coming out? Is it you or something that's, you've heard at a dining table, you've seen in a rehearsal. Quasar told me this lovely story at the Jaipur Literature Festival of my mother's telling him that to be a director, you have to be a dictator, don't you? And it's so true.
One of my, are there any questions? Oh, there are a couple. Oh, good.
Hi, my name is Aditya. I was actually shortlisted for the Sultan Padamsee Award last year. I would actually like to have heard about the practice of theatre per se. My question is there a family ethos to the sort of productions you've undertaken historically? Any of you can answer it. Is there a signature style or a precedent that you follow while choosing to perform a certain type? Is there a certain family tradition that one can say exists in your production history, or is it slightly more ad hoc than that?
No, I think it's very much rooted in the social and political reality. So if Alec chooses to do Julius Caesar with Usha playing Caesar at a moment when Indira Gandhi is at the height of her power, the political statement is right there. I've had 4 productions which were stopped during the emergency. I've gone to court, as I've written in the book, on our production of Bhutto, which was stopped the day we were opening the play because Zia was going to reach India. And so much of what Quasar does is completely political, whether it's on mental health issues or farmers' issues. And so much of what my cousin Raell does with children of differing abilities. She makes it a point to do a huge production every year with blind children. And so by choosing to do that, that's a statement by itself, isn't it? To actually bring a disabled child onto the stage. And it's a moment none of us forget, being on the stage, being on the spotlight, beyond those dreadful chemistry marks and how many times we failed in maths or what we did in the boys' bathroom. There's very much just that energy. And as theatre performers, if we're not in the here and the now, not responding to what's happening in the world and in our own situation, I think the meaning is there. And perhaps that meaning is there from Bobby's time. And all of us, including my niece, Zulekha Chaudhary, or my sister, Amal Alana, or Aisha Sayani, in the choice of plays, like your own piece, you can see in the choice of what we give as Sultan Padamsee Awards. That also reflects the thinking. So it's never something silly, frivolous, light, comic. Of course, there can be comedy, but it'll be dark, it'll be satirical, it'll be sardonic, it'll be sarcastic. It'll bite, it'll leave you thinking. So I think that whole idea of theatre being a place where you get ideas to chew on after the show. And with many of my plays, people say indigestion for 3 days. The ideas were too much. Yeah. Ma'am, you had a question. I'm sorry, did you all want to respond? Quasar and
No, I think it's fine. I think in terms of form and style, we've all been left to pursue our own kind of ways of how we create work. I mean, the work that Dad creates, and the work that Raell creates, the work that I create, the work that you create, Faisal, the work that Amal, Zuli, it's all quite diverse. I mean, if you can't say that it comes overtly from one source, but I think what does hold, and you're absolutely right, is that there has to be a purpose for the work that is being created, and a purpose within the socio-political space that we are in, and whether it's about enabling people to come onto stage, or whether it is the kind of topics we choose, there is a purpose why this piece of work is happening at this time now. And I think I'd never thought of it until you mentioned it. So yeah, I mean, I've never really considered it. So thank you for the question, and thank you for your answer, Faisal.
Hello, good evening to everyone here. My name is Rishti. I teach in St. Joseph's College in Bangalore. We have a theatre course for undergraduate students, and it's a new course, and I've looked at the students over the last 1.5 years and seen them grow, even though they've been online for the last 3 semesters. So I think listening to all of you today, the biggest takeaway that I have is just simply that it's important to be within a particular space to create something, to perform, to be able to exist in a different world. And I'm kind of just taken by how much the students have lost out on because of the pandemic. So I was just wondering if you have any advice or words of advice for students, or even for us as teachers, if there's something we could do to kind of help young people when this opportunity is not available to them. Thank you.
Certainly, I think that's a wonderful question. I'd love to address it. For my group, it was a big question. We were short of opening our production of Noor, which we opened night before last at Ranga Shankara last year in March. We were just 3 days before the show when the lockdown happened. So everything was ready. And we had that 3 times with Noor. Every time we were ready with the show and it was announced and tickets were all sold, 50%, but sold, it was off. So very early on during the whole lockdown and having to go through the medium of Zoom for us, and we use Zoom and not Google this and Microsoft that, we chose Zoom. We started a weekly theater event, a weekly event in culture, and a lot of it was theater. We did 39 productions from May last year to perhaps the end of February this year, every Friday. And we built up an audience of between 50 to 100 at each show. We would do 3 or 4 rehearsals. So all my actors got a chance to explore texts that we'd never done. We did the whole of Three Sisters over 4 weeks using the lighting and using the medium. We did beautiful Hindi short stories, some of them with fantastic backstories, which I could narrate if we had the time. And finally, in those 39 performances, I realized, because we put them up on Facebook, 25,000 people have seen them. If I ran shows in that time, I would not reach 25,000 people. And every day they're being seen, whether it's my production of Tisri Kasam, or whether it's a Nirmal Verma story, or whether it's something else or something else. So it's a huge medium. It's tough, and we've got more sophisticated. My cousin Aisha was always there and saying, now do this, try this, try this. And then Zoom brought the lovely filters. So we were able to use black and white sequences. We were able to go more cinematic in our rendering from just the frame. So we started exploring, and then we got fed up. We said 39 bahut ho gaya. Then we just started in-group play readings. So we read Miller, we read Sartre, we read a whole lot of modern writers, we read Birthday Party, and that was also a lot of fun. It was what are called cold readings without any preparation, but through Zoom. And I think Quasar's done a lot of this as well. Sure, he'll have something to add.
So, I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic world for theater is very much a stopgap, at least for the theater people. I mean, I know that the thing I miss most is rehearsal, being in the room with other people, and bizarrely enough, hugging people. Because as a theater community, we're huggers. When we meet, we hug. When we have a good line or a good scene, we hug. When we leave, we hug. And that inability is tough. And the reason why I mention hugging and all of that is particularly when you don't know the people, which is what generally a theater group, when it starts, what it is. And also, in your case, ma'am, with regards to students who haven't met and haven't really interacted with each other, it's an incredibly isolating thing. Unfortunately, as a stopgap in this time, we have to look at ways that we can keep everyone engaged with each other, and set up how they get to know each other. One of the big problems really is that on Zoom there is no chai break. When you take a break from rehearsal, you're all sitting around having tea. It is a social atmosphere. And that's really where a lot of the relationships get built with regards to how you want to take a show forward. And a lot of young people right now have been denied that, particularly within the college circuit. And, you know, and I don't just mean people studying in the theater courses, but even the ones who are doing it, like DU, for example. The Delhi University has this whole incredible culture of theater companies in their each campus. But they haven't even interacted, they haven't met. So it is something that is difficult, and it is something that we have to reintroduce this dynamic when everyone comes together. And the fact that it is okay to be together. I do believe that the theater has a huge role to play as we come out of the pandemic. Because it's one of the few places where you go and you watch another live human being in the same shared space with curiosity and generosity. And we've been spent the last 2 years looking at our fellow man with kind of, you know, they are out to kill me kind of vibe. You know, oh, they've coughed, they are trying to poison me. And I think the theater has a huge role to heal all of us in this way. And I think college programs and things like that have an even greater responsibility to bring people together, to kind of work together and then take that forward. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, sorry.
I'd like to add.
The thing is, like, theater every time reinvents itself. It doesn't stop. Every time some major crisis comes, you know, like it reinvents. So it comes in a different way, but it doesn't stop. Now, last 2 years, everybody was busy kind of to try and reach to the audience in another way, like through the cameras, but the effort was there, you know, like we were doing the same kind of rehearsals, but of course I'm doing from my house, somebody else is doing there, but it was a time that theater was reinventing itself. Now, when you go back, I mean, 6 months ago, we were allowed only 50 people in the auditorium and just 4 or 5 people on stage. Now you have to again reinvent that for a smaller audience with a small little cast. What do? You have to redo a play, reinvent it. Slowly you come back, but you know, like that, something else has happened now. A new phase in theater has started, so it will come back. You know,
Raell wanted to say something. Raell.
Yeah, I'd like to just add something. You know, we work a lot with young people and the children, young adults, and we've kept this going through these last 2 years. We haven't done productions per se, but we have grown so much in the improvisatory space online. It sounds bizarre because we have people all over the world. And, you know, just yesterday we had a performance with somebody. One of my students was from Vietnam, one was from Doha, one was from Raipur, Indore, you know, but what's important is to keep the creative process going. So if you're in the college, I mean, and you can't really rehearse online, I would still suggest that you do a lot of improvisations, you work on building the creative mind of your students, which is so terribly important in today's day and age, and that they get to express themselves. So that's very, very key. In fact, we've started a huge program called De-Stress with Drama. And we found that it works very well with young people, with adults. Just yesterday, we did a program with cancer survivors. So we use theater to be able to enable people to come out of what kind of pandemic that they are feeling themselves. They are able to express themselves and just be in the moment and be creative and frankly share a lot with each other. It's a huge, huge connector, I feel.
Well,
sorry if that helps you in the college.
Mm-hmm. What better way to end than to think about theatre as a huge, huge connector. Thank you so much for this session. It was brilliant. I think you walked us through the early birth, as it were, of theatre, as Suri put it, you know, the legacy and where it came from, the past right to the present, to this moment of the pandemic, and also of all the inspirational people. I mean, one of my most memorable moments was meeting the a formidable Pearl Padamsee, in fact, and being allowed to sit in as a young kid from Bangalore visiting her cousins, to sit in on a rehearsal, and that stayed with me. It stayed with me. I felt like I had connected with her in that moment. So I think it's really been just a fantastic opening into this world. Thank you so much for sharing it. Thank you, Feisal, for the book, for triggering this conversation. Thank you, Raell and Quasar, for coming in and sharing your stories and talking about what theatre means to you. And we feel the passion. I think everybody in the audience will agree. And thank you, Suri, for such a wonderful walkthrough and for that sheaf of questions that got us through this. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.